Today we're going to be talking a lot about epiphanies and breakthroughs, and I wanted to jump straight into your first breakthrough moment, and if this was a breakthrough moment or an epiphany, well, when you wanted to become a wedding photographer. Can you take us back to that moment?
Oh, I was, well, I fell in love with photography very early before I planned on becoming a wedding photographer. So, probably in junior high. And I had a friend who was doing photography at the time. I remember seeing an image that she took of a kid she was babysitting. And, it was film, black and white image that she took. And just the composition was so simple, but so creative. And it really struck me. And so I really started getting interested in photography. So when I, started working, got my first job, saved up all the money that I earned and bought myself an SLR. Again, this is way back. It was still film. My parents built me a dark room in my bedroom in this little, it was up in the eaves. So it was, the tables were like on the floor and I had a little rolly chair just so I could sit and develop things in the room myself. And yeah, my brothers got married. They said, hey, take our pictures. So I took their pictures, and then it kind of just snowballed from there. I was doing voice lessons at the time, and my vocal teacher recommended me to a couple that were getting married. So I had strangers approach me, say, hey, can you take our wedding pictures? And yeah.
Wow. So you shot both of your brothers' weddings.
I did. And I was also a bridesmaid at the same
Wow.
time. So that was tricky.
And you shot them on film at the time.
Shot them on film, on black and white film.
Wow. So all black and white. What year was this, if you don't mind sharing?
2003. That would have been 2003. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit around shooting your brother's wedding? You were a bridesmaid as well. You're shooting on film. It was all black and white. So they didn't want color.
I think I just preferred black and white. And,
okay.
Like with film, you kind of have to commit to one or the other. So once you've put in the roll of film, you got to finish that out. And
yes.
I think for the first wedding that I shot for the couple that I had never met before, I used maybe like 6 rolls of film, 3 were black and white and 3 were color. And so their ceremony was in color, but their official photos are all black and white. And, there's no changing that. So
okay. How did that influence your approach to future weddings that you shot? So you shot this other couple that you hadn't met before, and then you started to shoot more weddings.
I didn't start to shoot more weddings until I moved back to Canada. So I was living overseas. I kind of spent my teenage years and college years living overseas. When I moved back to Canada, all I had with me was a bag full of books and clothing, and didn't know how to drive, because when you're living in a big city, you don't need to drive. You just take buses everywhere. So my dad gave me some money and said, here, go get your driver's license. And I said, thanks for the money, Dad. I'm going to use it to buy a digital camera instead. Didn't ask his permission, but made the switch to digital, and it was rough. It was really, really rough. So this was back in 2006. YouTube didn't really exist. There was no information out there on how to be a wedding photographer and run a business. So it was a lot of really bad photos for a while, and just kind of learning from all those mistakes. But when I first started with the digital, what I did was I shot all my color in digital, but I still brought along my film camera and continued shooting black and white film for a bit. And it's just interesting now, that's kind of come back. People are doing that again. I have people asking me again if I'll shoot film. And I'm like, yes, of course. Like that's how I got started. I'm used to that. But yeah, it eventually my editing got good enough that I felt that the black and white, could all be digital as well. But at first there was just a special quality to film that I wasn't able to replicate, and really loved that.
So what kind of I'm shooting film a lot more than I ever used to as well, and been shooting it a lot over the last few years, mostly for personal work. It started to make its way more and more into weddings. What is your go-to film camera and favorite film type?
Well, I started out on Nikon. So I still have my first SLR here, and that's what I'd use, if I'm shooting film again. And living overseas, the kind of film we had was Ilford. I don't even know if you can get that in Canada. Can you get that in Canada?
Ilford, I haven't seen it here, no.
No, that's what I shot. It was Nikon and Ilford. Yeah. So I still shoot Nikon, but it's progressed through the DSLRs, and now I'm shooting fully mirrorless with both my camera bodies.
Amazing. Yeah. So you've seen a lot of changes throughout the years, 2006, learning on your own. How would you kind of summarize the last 18 or 17 years? Like, walk us through a bit of maybe some of the trends that you've seen, or the journey that you've been on as a photographer from like a high level, because if somebody may be listening to this and they've only been shooting for a couple of years, and 2006 obviously was a while back. I started shooting weddings in 2009. I've seen a lot of changes too. What are some of the highlights, or what comes to your mind when you think of the changes over those years?
Well, you know how they're always joking that nowadays teenagers don't go through an awkward phase, and we always had an awkward phase when we were younger. I feel like photography is a lot like that. Like, we went through an awkward phase there for a while where everybody was on Pinterest and everybody wanted to do that weird, image that they saw on Pinterest with the forced perspectives and that sort of thing. And so we tried that out for a while, and it was, those are the pictures that you hope nobody ever sees that you took. When I first started on film, before there was Pinterest, those ones I love to look back on. But yeah, there were a number of awkward years there where we were all kind of trying to follow trends. And I feel like now, someone who's maybe entering the photography business now, they're kind of lucky because they don't really go through that awkward stage. They're kind of just able to jump in. There's so many resources for them, and you can get your really good presets and, not do really, really bad photos. So yeah, there's been a lot of changes, but that's okay. I like to learn from doing and from experiencing. You really kind of find your groove that way, and find, what it is that you like. I think you can sum it up though, just in, there's these moments where all of a sudden you notice something a little bit different, and you kind of start to see things differently and think of things differently. And so that's kind of, I look back and I see those key moments in my work that, where I really kind of took a turn and decided to take things in different directions, and, really refine who I was and what my work was going to be. So.
Totally. Yeah. You mentioned many turning points and these epiphanies. What is an epiphany to you, first and foremost? And what was the first epiphany that you had?
I mean, I just love the word epiphanies, so I try and use it all the time. It's a pretty word to say. It's fun. They're really just those light bulb moments, those moments where all of the things that you've been seeing or hearing for so long just kind of fall into place and all of a sudden make sense to you, and you kind of know what to do with that information that you've been gathering. So the first epiphany moment that I think of whenever I think of, my work as a photographer, I like to call it the Cheetos at the reception moment. It was back when I had first moved to Canada and just started doing this full time. And so, you start doing it full time, you're not really confident in what you're doing. I'm pretty sure that by then I had started shooting raw. When I first started, it was still all JPEGs. That's how bad it was. So, I'd kind of moved on a little bit. I'd kind of gotten a bit better. People were talking about my work. People would, say how much they loved it. So getting a bit of confidence, but I was still charging very, very, very cheap prices. And I shot this one wedding that was a shotgun wedding, meaning all of the groomsmen were standing there up front holding shotguns, for the photos, and wearing their camo out in the woods. And there was one point at the reception when I'm sitting there, and it's in, just the Lions Club or something. There's no decorations. None of the guests have hung around. Everyone has kind of left. There was no food. Every table had one bowl of Cheetos on it. Wow. And that was it, a tea light from the dollar store. And so, there had been kind of no effort put into it. And And even the bride and groom were like, where are they? No one had any idea where they were. If I were shooting it now, I would shoot it very differently. I would be finding that story. I would be following them wherever they were. But at the time, I didn't know how to do that. We didn't really talk about story very much back then. And so eventually I got tired of waiting around for where they were. And I went out to look for them. And they were all out in the parking lot, just drinking beer out of the back of their truck. And I kind of had this moment where I realized that this was not what I wanted to be spending my time doing. I didn't want to be shooting weddings for people who didn't care about their wedding. They weren't putting any effort in, not for photos. It wasn't even so much even about photos. It was just the whole day itself. They really did not care much about their wedding. And so they weren't investing in it. And that's when I realized, like, I need to up my prices. If I want to reach people who really care about what's going on, who are really invested in each other, invested in their relationship and their memories. And it's not always because, if you spend a lot of money, you love each other more. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the people who really care about those moments are the ones who are willing to pay more and aren't looking for just the cheapest thing that they can find. And so, that was my first epiphany moment in work, was really just about that pricing. And it was because they were all sitting there eating Cheetos. It was really bad. It was a really bad wedding. Yeah.
I love the title of that, Cheetos at the reception. It's incredible. And for sure, I totally understand if you were shooting it now and that was to happen, the emphasis on story is so different, and it's definitely changed. So how has your pricing for the types of clients that you want evolved over the years as well? How do you feel like that epiphany has carried you over the years?
I think it's just led me to really value my work more. And the older I get and the more experience I have and the more kids I have, the more I value my work and my time. It means more to me now that I'm going to be investing that time into somebody's wedding than it did maybe when I was first starting out. So I think the way it's evolved is just every year kind of looking it over and saying, what's the cost of living? What am I putting into this business? And how much do I need to see to get a return on that? The Maritimes are still a lot less expensive a place to live than Ontario per se, and definitely the West Coast. Cheapest place in Canada, if anyone wants to come out. Very affordable housing prices. And so that kind of trickles down to a lot of things with clients here. And so you have to understand that market. And I think what has happened is that 90% of my couples do come to me from out of province, actually. So I shoot in the Maritimes, but the people who are coming and hiring me are people who live in BC, they live in Alberta, they live in Ontario, and they're coming back here because they have family here or they want to get away. And then they find me and hire me for their weddings. And that's great. I also love traveling. So I've shot weddings throughout the US, in Ontario and just around, but for the past couple of years, it's been mostly here just with young children. But hey, if anyone wants me anywhere else, I will go anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. So you shared with me several epiphanies over the years. Can you share another epiphany that you had? And for anyone who may have had an epiphany in their own career or a light bulb moment, by sharing that epiphany, can you share like how you then implemented it as well and carried it through?
I think when I first started moving into just higher end weddings, I kind of had that sense that I had to go all light and airy and light and bright because that's what you see a lot. And, I like it. It's very nice. And so I did try to work my presets. I've always made my own presets to really encapsulate that light and airy, and also just get that idea of one thing that I was always looking for was negative space in art, how that's going to bring about a sense of calm or quiet, because I'm a pretty quiet and calm person. And I wanted that to reflect in the images as well and just simplify things a bit. So I was really leaning very heavily toward light and airy presets. And then another epiphany I had one time, I had hired a local photographer to come and work with me on a wedding. We were going down to Halifax for the weekend, and she was coming as my second shooter. And she is just this outgoing, bubbly, very kind of silly, goofy person. And her work is amazing. And when she shoots and edits it, it's all really, really quiet, but it's really dark. She edits very dark. And I was just commenting to her saying, how funny it is that I'm a very quiet person. I'm a very introverted person. And yet I was editing all light and airy. And here she was, a very bubbly and outgoing person. And she edits very, very dark and calm. And that just got me to thinking, how much my work was actually reflecting who I was. Because it's one thing to like a certain look in photos, but it's another thing for it to really reflect who you are. And so I realized that I didn't want to be the light and airy. Like I didn't like how it looked. But I couldn't just make a switch instantly. So when you have couples who have hired you for a wedding in a year or 2 years from now, they've hired you based on the portfolio that you have, that you're showing. And at the moment, everything I was showing was very, very bright. So I didn't want to just all of a sudden next season go and hand these, clients, all of these very dark and moody images, and have them all hate it, because that just isn't fair to them. So it was a very slow implementation for me. I just kind of gradually over the course of 2 years, brought things down a little bit, made, even though the colors are still a bit desaturated, but worked on intensifying them and just really seeking out and making sure that what I was showing in my social medias, in my Facebook, really reflected kind of that new direction. Because what I found was that sense of calm and quiet that I had been looking for and trying to get out of, a white wall background. I was actually able to find that a lot better in those depths, in the shadows, adding that sense of mystery to the work that I had been kind of looking for. So yeah, it was a long process of very slowly and subtly changing my presets over time so that nobody went through a big shock. I'm sure if you scroll back through my Instagram, you'll see kind of the moment where it changes, where I've gone from just blowing out all of my highlights to bringing everything down a bit. But just trying to keep that balance between what the clients were expecting and, the direction that I wanted to take.
Totally. So I love that it took, a lot of focus and a lot of intention to make that happen, but it was a gradual process because of the reasons that you mentioned, with your clients that previously booked you. Throughout this process, were you doing some personal work? Were you kind of sharing some of these images in between? What were some of the responses to that work when you were making that transition?
I mean, I'm always trying to do personal work. I think it's really important as an artist to always do things that inspire you, to do things that you enjoy. And a lot of times when we're working for other people, maybe their tastes and styles aren't exactly what you want to be showing. So it's important to do a couple of times a year at the very least, to do things for yourself. And so it was really just about curating what I was showing. So I might be doing some works for clients based on, who had hired me previously, and giving them what they were expecting, but at the same time, building up a new repertoire of things that I could show people that reflected me a little bit more. And it has to be very intentional. I think photography is an art. And when I first started this, my thought was, oh, I will take pictures and people will give me money. And that was as far as I understood the business. And now, 10 plus years on, you realize that taking the pictures is maybe 10%. And the business side is just so much bigger than you could have expected. So it's important to make sure that you're feeding that artistic side that we originally got into this for. And just being intentional with your art. So doing a lot of really focused creative planning, which for me looks like every year I will do at least one different workshop. Maybe at first they were more about how to shoot, but now it's a lot more of the undercurrent of things now that I'm really confident in my shooting. But doing those workshops, and then just feeding your creative soul in like so many different ways. Like it doesn't have to be about photography, right? Because you can find inspiration in so many different areas. And when you're being intentional and when you're thinking about what is it that I'm seeing, what is it that I am inspired by, what is it that I want to do or want to portray, then it's really easy to have those moments of illumination and those moments of epiphany because you're giving opportunity for them. So yeah, doing a lot of those really focused things. So for example, one epiphany that I had while doing my focus was I realized that I had been so worried about being technically correct. I, wanted to make sure that my lighting was perfect. Wanted to make sure that the focus was always tack sharp and always exactly where it needed to be. And that, the frame was composed so perfectly that in doing that, I was missing a lot of, the emotion and the moments, but also like, how do you portray feelings with a still image? Like, how do you portray that in a photograph? And so I would go through and I was writing. I don't really journal because I'm not good at daily journaling, but I do like write down creative ideas. So I was writing down, well, how would I show in a still picture feelings of uncertainty or feelings of desire, like just kind of those kind of questions, like what does that look like as an image? And what I realized was that I really had to let go of that perfectionism and making sure that every image was perfect. And in doing that, just embracing if there's motion blur, if, maybe the focus isn't exactly perfect, maybe I want it to be a little underexposed or, whatever it is, just giving myself that freedom. And that was really,
I love
really,
that. So
letting go of making sure that I had that perfect photo every time.
So being more in the moment, so to speak, with what's in front of you and thinking less with a technical mind of everything being accurate, specific with your settings and the light, but more just like feeling the images through and shooting in that way. And that was
exactly.
That was like, would you say that was an epiphany that you had over?
It really
over
was. I started posting images that I never would have posted or shared with people before, ones that I would have been afraid to because, they weren't in focus, or they weren't perfectly composed. And all of a sudden it was just like, here's a blurry image. Deal with it. It's a great shot, So
I love it. So you touched upon a little bit around cultivating an atmosphere where epiphanies can thrive. Can you speak a little bit more around that? So how does one who may have had a light bulb moment or a breakthrough or an epiphany go from making it less frequent to more frequent?
I think to cultivate that environment for epiphanies, you really do, like I said, you have to be intentional with seeking out inspiration, with being aware of where your inspiration comes from, the sort of things that really bring you to life and give you joy. And then just allowing yourselves those moments of quiet or moments to really enjoy those things. So a lot of times we're always trying to monetize, when we don't want to do anything unless it's bringing us money or it's being productive, when really what we need to do is find those moments of calm. So for me, it was allowing myself to, maybe not follow photographers or not be doing, reading a book about photography, but just enjoying other art in general. For other people, it might look different. It might be movies that inspire them, or it might be walks in the woods, but just allowing yourself those moments of quiet. And then I guess the epiphanies, you can't control them. They happen when they happen, but they happen because they're a culmination of all of the things that you have been seeing and listening to, right? And when they come and you kind of recognize it, there's almost no denying it. It's almost like you can't help but change things. I think that's kind of the difference with the epiphanies. When they come, you realize, oh, I have to do it differently. Like I can't keep doing it the same way. And that's going to look different for everyone with every epiphany. in how they move forward from there, depending on what it is. It could be something really, really small, like the time that I had another photographer tell me that I only needed to show the work that I wanted to do, and I realized, oh, I don't have to put the cake smash photos on my website if I don't want to do cake smashes. That was an easy one to implement. Just go take them all off the website. But depending on what it is, it's going to look different for everyone. But just being aware, being intentional, and finding moments of inspiration, and they'll come. They always do. They always come. The epiphanies always come.
Yeah, I feel like you defined epiphanies for yourself, and I feel like for myself, it's something that would really, it's such a light bulb moment, or it's such a breakthrough that you're almost forced to make moves, because you can't, you just can't do it the other way anymore, because you've learned something, or you've gained that inspiration. And I love that you mentioned to really continue to make space, be intentional with your creativity, and to let that flourish. And then these epiphanies or these moments will come together so that you can evolve and grow yourself and your business and your creativity. So looking back on your career, or looking back over even the last few years, what would you say has been the most important lesson you've learned as a wedding photographer? What's one that really sticks out for you?
I think it's important not to limit yourself with being inspired by only photographers. So a lot of times you see photographers who will follow photographers and only look for ideas from other photographers. And I think that you need to be open to finding that inspiration and finding that other places as well. So for me, it's always been like, I get a lot of my ideas for my photos from art. I love paintings. I love going to, museums of paintings, and I definitely have eras that I love the most, which is funny now when I think back on it. I realize that all of them are the very, very dark, very moody, very single light images that, I was trying not to shoot for so long. And now I'm like, no, just embrace it. Like, let my photos look like a Renaissance work or whatnot. So yeah, let yourself be inspired by so many things, poetry and music, and always finding inspiration in those things, whether it's while you're editing, while you're shooting, or just going out for walks and listening to music and podcasts. All of those things are going to trickle down into your work. And so whatever you're surrounding yourself with is what your work is going to show.
Yeah, totally. The phrase, maybe it's not the right one to use here, but garbage in, garbage out. Typically, if you're not inspired, or you're watching things that aren't inspiring you, then that can sometimes come into your work. But when you are being inspired by just beautiful music, poetry, art, photography, that you start to see that in your environment, in your surroundings, in your work, in your jobs that you get, and in your personal work, and then you start to create that. So I'm currently reading Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and he talks a lot about being managing your inputs and being in environments where you can be inspired, and how that can then feed your work as well. So it sounds like you have so many different avenues for inspiration, and that's really beautiful to hear. We'll be going to some quick fire questions near the end, because I would love to hear some of your favorites around that. But what I wanted to move on to next is your epiphany around GIFs or GIFs.
Yep.
However one wants to.
All the controversy about how we say this word. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Share with us how GIFs have, I'm going to call them GIFs for this interview, but how has that changed the game for you, and how was it an epiphany?
Yeah, so this was probably right around the time that we were all in lockdown. For years, I would always say to people, I would confess, well, I'm a photographer, but I kind of like videography better. And the fact is, I can't do video. It's just not how I see the world. You know, I try. I'm sure I could do maybe at some point, but that's my sister's thing. It's not my thing. But I always really, really loved that emotion behind video that sometimes I felt I just couldn't capture with a photo. So I was looking through just some other photographers, and I came across these photographers that were using GIFs, and you know, you've seen them around. I had seen them many times before. I always thought, oh, that's really cool. And they were always of some pretty big, intense moments or things that, you know, they've planned out and they've gotten a couple to do, and they've made this little GIF of it. And it was really just kind of kitschy. But I came across these photographers that were utilizing GIFs in a way that I had never ever seen before, where it was just mixing photography and GIF, having a whole lot of GIFs. So instead of just doing one big moment, it was just these tiny moments. It was, you know, 2 seconds of a breath that someone was taking, or a look that somebody gave, or the way that someone was stroking the other person's hair. And they were just so full of emotion, and it just captivated me. And I thought, wow, like I never realized that I could deliver an entire gallery that's almost all GIFs instead of doing just still photos. Maybe it's a Harry Potter moment, maybe. But just like moving photos that that just kind of bridged that gap between video and the emotion that video had, and what I was trying to capture in photos. And so I was like, I have to do that. I was head over heels. I was so in love. I was like, I have to do that. And I didn't know anything about it or how to make it. And so I spent the past 2 years, just, I guess you could say, practicing. And I practiced on real clients. You know, I changed the gear that I was shooting with to make sure that it was gear that was able to do it, but without telling people, you know, this is part of the package and this is what I'm going to do. I just started doing it and retraining myself how to shoot and how to see moments again, so that I could incorporate this. And now, so it's been about 2 years that I've been doing this, and I've built up that collection of images that I can show to people and say, here's what it is, and here's how I shoot. And so now it is officially part of the way that I run my business. They're in my packages. It's included in the price. Definitely, again, had to up the prices there because, you know, it was a lot more time editing and a lot more time shooting more images, but it's now included in everything that I do, whether it's just a family session or it's a full wedding day. I'm going to be catching, you know, just tiny little glimpses of moments here and there. So it was a big change to a lot of different things. Even my second shooter, kind of having to train them on here's what we're going to be doing for these GIF moments. But yeah, just like all the other epiphanies, you know, you see it and you realize, I have to do that. That's what I need to do. That's the way that I need to run my business. And so far at the moment, I think I'm one of the only photographers in our area that has that, you know, like officially included as a package. I'm sure other people do them here and there, but it's kind of it's a very intentional philosophy for me behind how I shoot. So.
I love that it bridges the gap between photo and video for you. And, you know, I myself have been super interested in video. I got a Super 8 like 8 years ago and was shooting a bit of Super 8 here and there and just loved it, but never found myself fully, you know, embracing it. But I love that that's something you had, and then you found GIFs as an incredible way to bridge
and
that
it's great because you don't have to switch back and forth between, you know, your video settings and your shooting photography settings, because when you're at a wedding and, you know, it's that moment at the ceremony and they're going to kiss or they're putting the ring on or whatever, you know, I was always afraid if I'm trying to catch it on video, if I'm trying to switch back and forth, I might miss it. But where I can shoot the whole thing as stills and then turn it into a living, breathing moment afterward, it just kind of takes away some of that anxiety of, oh, I don't want to miss that. So
that's incredible. That's incredible. I'm going to share one of them now for the audience that's here and anyone who's watching this on YouTube. So this is one of the faves out of the set that you gave me. So can you share with us a little bit around what's happening here for anyone who's listening to this?
So
on
this was
the podcast?
an elopement I shot just recently. And this couple had never, ever, ever had photos done before. So the last time they'd had photos taken was, Walmart when they were 6 years old kind of photos. So we would joke to the whole session, this was better than Walmart. But this was an elopement that I did. And part of my process when I'm booking couples is I really want to get to know them and who they are. And I have very extensive questionnaires that go out to my couples before their wedding days or their elopement days. And so one of the things that I had learned about this couple was that words of affirmation is, for both of them, their biggest love language. And words were really, really important to the both of them. So I knew that I had to incorporate their words and make their words a big part of that elopement session when we did it. So they had written their own vows for each other. And this was the groom going over his vows beforehand. And he was just kind of sitting there speaking them aloud to himself. I think I have another one where you can see his face and his lips are moving as he's kind of practicing his vows beforehand. And then again, later on when they were exchanging those vows, making sure that I got in really close so you could kind of see their vows as they're speaking to each other and the reactions that they had one to another.
Love it. Okay, this one.
So this is obviously a groom on his wedding day. He's waiting up at the front there. We had already done a first look. We had already done photos together. They had been together all afternoon. But like I like to tell my couples, that never takes away from the moment that, you're walking down the aisle. And so this was his reaction on seeing her walking down the aisle toward him. This was 2 seconds before the skies opened up and it started pouring rain and the entire wedding had to run indoors. But one thing that I noticed was when I shoot the facial expression of a groom or whoever's standing there at the front, when I shoot their expression in just a still, it doesn't always look good. Sometimes it's just like a really ugly moment, even though, they were crying so beautifully, you might not be able to really notice that or really see. So in shooting the GIFs, you can really see his lip quivering and you can see him trying to blink away the tears there. And it was just really precious. I love that.
Yeah, I love this too, because it exactly for that reason. His eyes, the way he's also his thumb, I think it like kind of fidgets a little bit, and then you can just feel the tension or the nervousness, but just the joy as well of him seeing his bride walk down. It completely captures that. And with a video, this may be again like a split moment, and then it pans to the bride walking down. Yeah, it's just this really allows you to hold on to that moment and feel it and feel almost what the groom is feeling here in this moment. And it's such a unique and beautiful way, or at least unique to me, in a way of sharing a moment like that. So yeah, I definitely wanted to share that one. It's definitely a favorite of mine. So we were talking about being in the moment, embracing imperfection, sharing movement. This is definitely one of my favorite images of yours as well. Absolutely love this.
This is an engagement session. I'm going to be shooting their wedding here in less than a month. Super sweet couple. And she was just so much fun and so sweet. So we drove out to the beach where he had proposed, and it was a 2-hour drive to go for the engagement session, but it was gorgeous. There was this, rocks covered with seals out in the water that were just singing this very soulful song. And I wanted them to have some fun. So they were dancing and he was spinning her around on the beach. So this is me. I have changed my settings. So it's a really, really slow shutter speed. And I followed her. So I am running in this photo and she is running in this photo. She's spinning, he's spinning her around. And yeah, that's just what we got. You kind of just run and go with it. And, she's laughing because we were being so ridiculous. But that was her. Yeah.
Love it. Beautiful moment. And then the final image here. Just pull this up. Yeah, I love the light in this one, and plays to your personality and how you described before. Is
Mhm.
this personal work? What's the story behind this image?
Yes and no. It was just a portrait session.
Okay.
But I really wanted to just try some, try kind of pushing my ideas further. And a lot of times I think I'm afraid to shoot into that blue hour, and I kind of stop a little bit too early. So I was very intentional that I wanted to make sure that I stayed out even after sunset and shoot through in the darkest hours. So we were at the beach, and it was November, and it was very, very, very cold. Um, but yeah, this was kind of, the sun had just set and the moon was behind her, so it's not photoshopped. That's the moon, and the sky was just beautiful. So I had her walk away from the water through the grass, and just kind of, that's all natural light. That's just the setting sun on her. It was just a very beautiful, quiet moment. I think I love shooting in November at the beach now. That's kind of a new favorite.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing those images with us and a bit of a background to them. I wanted to end with those quick fire questions. And actually, before I do that, what would you say you're most excited for this year in 2023? What's the focus for you?
I think I'm just still really excited about gifts. I'm really excited for them to now officially be a part of my package and to be delivering that for people. And I'm really happy with where everything has brought me till now. It's nice because sometimes I feel like I'm constantly striving and constantly not happy with my work, but I'm at a place where I'm really happy with my work and I love doing it. So I guess I'm just happy to be with people again. Since COVID, it's always nice whenever you can go out and shoot without restrictions. And so never taking that for granted.
Well, if anyone was interested in creating their first GIF or to try it out, what would your recommendation be? What would be the first few steps to get going?
You definitely want to be shooting manual, because every image needs to have all of the same settings. So you can't have things changing in between, or it's just not gonna work, not gonna look good. So, if you're comfortable shooting manually, and setting all of that up and getting that locked in, and you just play around with it. So you put your camera in burst mode. The way I do it is I have my autofocus on continual. And I have it set so that it's, locked onto whatever it is that I'm trying to focus on, whether that's a face, or so even when I'm doing the movement ones as well, locking it onto their face or onto their hands. And then you're just going to shoot it in burst mode. And you're just going to hold that button down and you're going to shoot it in burst. And, so I realize when it is that I've shot for GIFs, because I'll have maybe 20 or 30 images, all of the same thing. You'll go through, you'll pick out, you can do a GIF with 20 or 30 images, but it's going to take up a lot of memory. So I recommend, having somewhere between 5 and 15 images. And what I do is I batch edit them all in Lightroom, and then you export it to Photoshop as layers. And from there you can make the GIFs all, there's some really good instructions online, just step by step going through Photoshop, how to make the GIFs in Photoshop. If you want to do it online with easy GIFs, you can do that, but the quality is never quite as good when you do it that way. But yeah, just manual. Manual is the big thing that you have to remember. So it works better when you've intentionally done it, shot it as a GIF. I tend to move around quite a lot when I'm shooting. I always use prime lenses, and so I like to get a lot of movement in there with my body. But when I'm shooting GIFs, you have to hold everything really still. So that's another thing. It's just telling yourself to stop. And that's a good thing too, because when you're shooting, you need those moments where you remind yourself to just breathe, take a breath, to think about what you're doing, think about how you're shooting. So yeah,
Love it.
when you're shooting manually, stand still.
I love how it invites, again, just more intention as well. And if you're looking to play at your next portrait shoot or wedding, and you see a moment that could be a GIF, again, it just like brings your awareness and your focus to that moment. Have a go, have a play, and then follow the steps that Elisabeth's laid out here. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have a question from Maxine. Any personal photo or creative projects on at the moment?
At the moment, No, I'm heading to Ontario next week, and I'm going to be meeting a new baby. So I'm going to be doing some pictures of the baby, but other than that, it's just wedding season has started up here, and so getting into weddings. And that's, I try to do most of my creative work during those off seasons. So in the winter months when you don't have as much other work to do. And yeah.
All right. So those quick fire questions, what would you say is one of your favorite photographers inside of weddings and outside of weddings?
Oh, there are so many good ones out there. And I feel like everybody always knows mine, but I don't know if they do. So I love the work of the pharaohs. Do you know the pharaohs? Yeah, in Italy. And I mean, it's so cinematic. They always have the most amazing stories to tell, and their shots are just beautiful. So yeah, definitely love the pharaohs, and I love the Kitcheners. And Rosie Red Photography, they're the ones that I saw who do the gifts. Who else do I want to mention? Yeah, those are some of my top ones there. There's a lot of them. There's so many great photographers around to follow.
And outside of weddings, anyone come to mind? Or you also mentioned, going to art galleries and painters. Who's inspiring you there?
And that's the thing, is that my Instagram, if you follow it, it's, there's maybe one or two photographers on there, but most of them are people I follow who are all painters and stuff like that. So just Tessa Brown Art. She does just some amazing landscapes, which is funny because I'm usually not a landscape person, but I do love her landscapes. And I know this is a weird favorite to put in there, but I love on YouTube Baumgartner restoration. So he's not an artist, he restores paintings. And I've probably watched a couple 100 hours of this guy restoring old paintings, and it has changed the way that I edit photos. So, it's amazing. Like I said, you can find inspiration anywhere. So, yep, love watching those painting restorations, love watching people while they're painting. I love the classics. So, all those old dead painters, not just necessarily new ones. You can never get enough of going back and looking over the masters and seeing what it is that they're doing.
Definitely. All right. What's a favorite book of yours, or what are you reading right now?
So a really, really good book, not just for photographers, but for all creatives. It's called The War on Art, or The War of Art, sorry, The War of Art. And he talks about how when we go to create, there's kind of that resistance that we meet, right? Whether it's remembering, things that you need to buy on your to-do list, or someone coming to the door, and there's just kind of always something that's going to stand in the way of you making art, and you just kind of have to do the work. And it's kind of a mantra for me. I read his book a number of years ago, and so I always kind of just in my head, I'm telling myself, do the work, like just go ahead and create, and worry less about what it's going to be, and just kind of let it be and make sure that I'm doing the work. And yeah, so I love that one, The War of Art. Right now I am rereading The Old Man and the Sea. So yeah, just kind of going through some old ones.
Amazing. And so you mentioned software wise, using Photoshop, things like that. Any other go-to tools or faves that you have?
A really good one for photo editing for culling actually is called Narrative Select. Have you heard of Narrative Select?
Yes.
So, I mean, I use Photo Mechanic for my culling, but last year I discovered Narrative Select, and I use it just for weddings because it's got that really great tool where it locks into people's faces, and it can show you color coded, so when you're looking at a group of 20 people or more in a family shot, to know how many of them have their eyes open and how many of them are squinting just really, really, really quickly. So it's really good for that. Their AI with the face detection is really good. So Narrative Select is a good one. Other than that, it's mostly I mostly use Lightroom and Photoshop for GIFs.
Love it. Beautiful, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for sharing and inspiring through your epiphanies and your breakthroughs over the years. I love the intention that you bring into your work, and I really appreciate you being here with us today on Coffee with Creatives.
I do have one recommendation that's not photo related if you want it.
Oh, please go for it.
So I don't know if anyone else is like me when you're doing your editing or when you're doing your, website SEO. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so podcasts are just a really, really great way of finding inspiration. But my favorite podcast of all time is called Cautionary Tales. And it just kind of makes you question how you see the world. And so again, it's that, looking at things a little bit differently, and it has nothing to do with art or photography or anything like that, but it's wonderful. So if anyone's looking for something to listen to while they're working, that's my go-to.
I love it. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks again. Appreciate you, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Exactly. All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.